Well, hey now, welcome to Fitz's Electric Bar. Fitz here, trying a little bit of a new set. My wardrobe has got me dressed up in a pseudo David Crosby jacket shirt kind of thing that clearly doesn't fit me, and I'm ready to rock. So this is my top 10 most, I guess, important records in my collection. So this has been making the rounds. I think my version of it is these are the albums that had the biggest impact and influence on my listening tastes. So I kind of looked at my records through that filter, and I pulled out about 250 records. I'm actually not even almost exaggerating, because I really sat there and kind of went, I love this record. I love this record. This record really was important to me. Oh, by the way, did you notice that one of my pictures is on fire over there? Yeah, just part of the whole new set. So, but then I started really thinking, well, is this for me a seminal release, a seminal record? And tried to narrow it down to 10 plus one. I've always got to add one more on it, which is kind of a little bit of a wrinkle on the whole thing. So 10 most influential or important records as I grew up. Now, one of the interesting things as I look at this list, and I've got a little cheat notes over here a little bit, I guess not surprisingly, but most of them are all in the 1973, 74, and it goes up as high as 1979. So there are all these releases of music that came after that of course, are fantastic. But when I sort of looked at this, I thought, well, these earlier records in my life, when I was about 14 or 15, came at a time when they opened up another world to me, or at least that's how it seems now when I look back on it. And once that world is opened up, there are many other things that are fantastic in that world. And hopefully this becomes a little bit more clear as I go through the video. So the first one, the one I'm most embarrassed about, but we all have to have a beginning, right, is Nazareth. This isn't the album, actually. It was Razamanaz, but it was one of the ones that got lost in the flood, or maybe I got rid of it, I'm not sure. But the reason that Nazareth, for me, it was really my first rock and roll band whose album I bought, I listened to. It was on my first full stereo. I had like a modular stereo that I bought when I was, 12 or 13 or something like that, when I had some money in my pocket from doing paper routes and things like that, and I had burned a hole and I needed to buy. But this was the first one where I had speakers and a proper amp, a Yamaha amp, and EPI 100 speakers and a proper system. And it was the first time I really understood what stereo was. It was the first time I used headphones. I then kind of tried to duplicate that by putting my speakers right near my ears and propping my head up on the floor on a pillow and having kind of the tweeters go right in there, not super loud. I still have decent hearing, but, to really maximize the stereo effect. And that Nazareth record was, it wasn't at the record. It was just the first time. It's like the first time you eat a lemon, you never forget it. The first time, I heard stereo, it was like, holy shit, that's amazing. So Nazareth is really where I would say I lost my rock and roll virginity. I'd listened to some stuff on the radio, things like Led Zeppelin, Living Loving Maid, into Heartbreaker, Freeze, All Right Now. All those things were really radio songs. I didn't own those records initially. I got the Nazareth record. I loved it. It was the first concert I went to as well at the Ottawa Civic Center. And so 1973's Razamanaz, that left a big impression on me, and it opened the door to what ended up being the majority of my high school listening days, things like Aerosmith, Foghat, Bad Company. Those were all bands that I absolutely loved, that I, bought the records, listened to them, and just loved them. But I guess you could say Nazareth was the gateway album or artists to kind of get me into that world. So that was number one, Nazareth. Razamanaz, not Hair of the Dog, but this one was consumed shortly afterwards and really enjoy it. So second one, the preface to this is I get really tired of everybody talking about the Beatles. Obviously, the Beatles deserve the attention that they get, but it just seems like you're kind of squeezing blood from a stone. So, but I got really into Paul McCartney through Band on the Run. I just loved and still love this record. As a whole, the whole record is just fantastic. And I remember one summer listening to this on cassette and just listening to it until the cassette just kind of unspooled and never got back. I just love this record. You know, the title track, Band on the Run, Bluebird, Jet, it just flows beautifully. And so I went nuts for this. I absolutely love this record. For a long time, I didn't listen to it. And I've just, recently been going back and listening to it and realized that there's nothing to be embarrassed about. Band on the Run is a great record. And it's kind of that beginning of the AOR stuff. I think of Steely Dan, Can't Buy a Thrill or whatever. Full albums, kind of 70s stuff with really strong craftsmanship, songs, playing, everything was really fantastic. So number 2, Band on the Run. Now number 3 is by David Bowie, but it's not the one that most people might expect. So I had been listening to Aladdin Sane and Diamond Dogs again on cassette, and then I bought, and again with my stereo, my sort of second stereo, David Live, and you can see it's all been taped up at the Tower in Philadelphia. Now, it's not that this is such a great record. It's more the whole point of this video is really that this was a huge influence on me. So in a sense, this was a Bowie greatest hits, and really the first greatest hits, I believe. I don't think he had put anything out greatest hits up until this point in time. And I just loved it. And I realized there's just so many great songs in his catalog to date. I think this came out in 1974, and just a fantastic record, a record that I played over and over again. Again, would you say this is one of the top David Bowie ones? Even live, stage would probably surpass it in terms of critical kind of evaluation. But it was, for me, that was the one that I just kept playing over and over again. And David Bowie really was also a bridge to many artists, but certainly Lou Reed. So in high school, I got into Transformer, and so this is my 4th record. This one came out in 72. I'm actually going to cheat a little bit, as I always do, and I'm going to do a twofer, and that's Transformer in Berlin. To me, these are almost like opposite sides of the same coin. This one is so positive in many ways, like the musicality. David Bowie, I think, produced it. He certainly mixed it, but he produced it. His backup vocals are on here. But just so many, the really whimsical, vicious. Andy's Chest with all of its hallucinogenic lyrics are fantastic. Perfect Day, which everybody knows from movies and everything else, and Walk on the Wild Side, everybody knows as well. Satellite of Love as well is so great, and especially the first side. But this record was wonderful, and introducing these kind of seedy characters with kind of love and affection. And this record for me was huge in high school. I think it was a friend's brother who kind of introduced me to this record, and I loved it. And then I, on my own, got really into Berlin. I call this really my first album of my winter of my discontent. This album is so perfect for wallowing in depression. I mean, this is about drugs and addiction and suicide. They're taking your children away. It's very heavy, beautifully orchestrated, and like just a crazy kind of narrative to the whole thing. Comes with a booklet with some wild images. It's very depressing, but when you're a teenager and you're going through your own kind of personal hell, this was a great soundtrack for that, and I just love this record. So those two Lou Reed albums kind of come in, the two of them, at number 4 for my most influential records for me in my life. Now, the other two that I'm going to do another twofer, and part of the reason for this is that I had a hard time really saying one was more influential or more important than the other. I might like one more than the other, especially over the passage of time. But when this next band came into my life, the moment I heard it, I was just so enthralled with their music, and I was just consuming all of their, back catalog, of which at the time was probably only 1 or 2 years previous. But I was so interested. I was buying all this stuff, and in particular, these albums grabbed me, and they were Roxy Music. Wow, that's quite the ring light thing there. Got to play around with this set. Roxy Music's For Your Pleasure, and Roxy Music's Country Life with the sexy photo. Famously, at least in Canada, it didn't have the two girls on it. It just had those ferns in the background. It didn't pass the censors, but it's now been released with this on it. We're in more liberal times. This one, for me, had songs on it that were just monumental. So Grey Lagoons, to me, is one of the most beautiful songs. Bogus Man, you know, you'd sit and smoke hash and turn out the lights and listen to Bogus Man, and you'd be transported to another place. And then in every Dream Home a Heartache, I mean, it's different musically, but it kind of reminds me of the Velvet Underground, something like John Cale's The Gift. I think it was John Cale, but you know, it's really kind of harrowing, and it's just a really super powerful song. So those three in particular, those songs really did it for me. But this is the album that I think consistently, track for track, is just a very complete album. Starts with the thrill of it all, with this great piano intro. When I saw Brian Ferry, it's the last show I saw before the pandemic, and he opened with the thrill of it all. And it was just great. That piano intro is just so exciting. And then the band comes in. Thrill of it all, 3 and 9, Out of the Blue, which is a great song, also a great live version on their Viva Roxy Music album. Casanova was just like a funk groove, just fantastic. Prairie Rose, beautiful ending to the album. But this one through and through, I think, is a great record. Roxy Music, Country Life. And so those two Roxys would come in as my sort of dual major influences for me in my top 10. Number 6, Brian Eno, Another Green World. So Brian Eno, of course, has been introduced to us through Roxy Music and those first 3 records, I guess. I think For Your Pleasure was the last one that he did. I was then aware of Brian Eno, and when this record came out, I think it was 1975, Another Green World, I started listening to this, and it was so different than anything else, certainly different than Roxy Music. So kind of introduced me to the idea of music made by machines. Now, of course, there's a lot more to it than that. Robert Fripp was, you know, somewhat introduced to me at this point in time as well, because I've never been a King Crimson fan. So some of the Robert Fripp and the beginnings of Frippatronics, I guess, on this record. But also the idea of drone, layers of kind of ambient music and the beginnings of ambience, even though this was before, I think, he had done his music for airports and music on land and things like that. But this for me really opened up a whole world. I love ambient music. I know people, Lionel Richie and others, are not necessarily so big on the minimalist stuff, but I really like it. And this was an album that really opened it up for me. You know, The Big Ship, all instrumental, just beautiful layers of, I guess, synthesizers, and I don't know what else was going on, but just I could imagine sitting on the water and suddenly through the huge, you know, through the fog, seeing this massive ship go by. That was kind of what I thought. Again, maybe that was right after Bogus Man. I've been smoking too much hash, but really I still love this record and Eno's solo work, not to mention all the stuff he's done with others like David Byrne and all his production work. But Another Green World was just a complete eye-opener, ear-opener for me. Number 6. Number 7, I don't have the record on me, so I'm going to put up there, but Iggy Pop, The Idiot. This one was very special for me, and in fact, it kind of references a lot of these albums also included me seeing them live. So when I think about Roxy Music around this time, it was a little bit later, I think when Love is the Drug or Siren came out, I saw Roxy Music. I saw Nazareth again, the first show, and a lot of the other bands I saw around the time that I was listening to their music. And sometimes the show was the thing that was the entrance into that artist's world. And then I started listening to the records. And this next one is that, Iggy Pop, The Idiot. I went to the show only because I knew that David Bowie was playing keyboards on the tour, and got there early, and it was general admission, about 10, 15 rows back, right in front of David Bowie's keyboards. Iggy Pop came out. I knew nothing about Iggy Pop. I mean, it was, you know, this is all after Funhouse and the Stooges, but I, at that point in time, had no understanding or familiarity with any of that music. He comes out and just tears it up and kind of freaks me out, and also just excites me to no end. And when he's talking to the crowd, and instead of saying, hello, Toronto, we love you, he was saying, you're all a bunch of fucking idiots. Now I want to be your dog, going backwards and just throwing himself around. And this is all before punk happened. So this would have been 76, I guess, when we went to see him, 75 or 76 when The Idiot came out. The Idiot was actually 1977. But punk had certainly not permeated my mental space at that point in time. And it just blew me away. I mean, Iggy was amazing. Interestingly, Blondie was the opening act, and this is after their first record just came out. So there was no visibility on Blondie or who Blondie was, and they were also outstanding. And I've talked about this before, but Iggy Pop, talk about Iggy Pop. To me, this was like my first kind of real blush with punk music. Now, you could argue that The Idiot is not really punk music. It's part of the kind of the Berlin work that was done, Bowie doing Low and Heroes, and Iggy doing The Idiot. I'm not sure if he did Lust for Life or not, but Bowie's all over this record as well, and singing backup vocals. I think he might have produced it. I'm not sure. I didn't check beforehand. But songs like Dum Dum Boys and Fun Time, and the first iteration of China Girl, and the band, the kind of claustrophobic sound of the band. It was kind of like, punk, but not in music, but more in attitude. And The Idiot just was perfect listening to that record right after seeing Iggy Pop live. And the reason that changed everything for me in terms of influence is I always joke that after that show, all of my Led Zeppelin, Foghat, Aerosmith, Bad Company records all went to the back of the Seal Test milk crates, and they hardly saw the light of day. Well, to this day, many cases, even though I can appreciate a lot of the 70s rock, everything changed after that. And I had experiences with like the Anarchy in the UK single, and I was in university, and a friend and I were taking a geography course, and it was a lot of things about earthquakes and tornadoes, and we were listening to Anarchy in the UK, and that was fantastic. Stranglers Norvegicus was also fantastic. But for me, The Idiot was the gateway that opened up that whole world for me and then allowed me to kind of go through. And I feel like Lou Reed and David Bowie were also paving the way to allow for me to be ready for that kind of music. And so Iggy Pop, The Idiot would be my number 7 album. My number 8 is my gateway into Neil Young. So, of course, I was familiar on the radio of things like Harvest and Heart of Gold and things like that, and Old Man, but none of it really stuck for me or felt like really fantastic. And then I think I heard Like a Hurricane first off of this, and I wanted to know where I could get it, and I got it on Decade, and it is a triple record. This actually, looking on it now, this is almost like a little bit the template for his Archives series, because he does deep cuts, he does unreleased stuff, and he does his hits all on here. And this is where the famous quote comes that, he had recorded, I guess it was Old Man or Heart of Gold, and that it was a big hit, but he found it very quickly it was a bore, and so he headed for the ditches. And subsequently, others have kind of named the 3 albums that followed Harvest, which I believe was Time Fades Away and On the Beach and Tonight's the Night, as the Ditch trilogy, and probably for me and many others, kind of his most interesting stuff. But I like his commercial and his out there stuff, and his stuff with Crazy Horse, et cetera, et cetera. But Decade was just, and a triple record. I mean, this just gave me so much to listen to for so long, to dive deep into his collection over many, many years of recordings. This was great. So Decade for me would be my number 8, super influential in my life. Number 9, my vinyl has gone missing, but I've got the SACD of Blood on the Tracks. Again, this is in that window of 1973 to 70. Well, it goes all the way to 79, but the amount of 73 and 74 is in my list is pretty strong. Blood on the Tracks for me, I had a huge heartbreak. My heart was broken, and Blood on the Tracks was the anecdote. And it was both the salve as well as an embellishment, in the sense of, You know, when you're walking around feeling like your heart's broken and you'll never be whole again, this record sort of helps justify that mindset and makes you feel like it's you and Dylan against the world. And this is actually a very well-rounded record, as most of us know. It's got anger, it's got sweetness, it also has kind of a look back on a relationship that was very meaningful, but it's also got, as the title suggests, there's blood on the tracks. And this record definitely, it introduced me really to the world of singer-songwriters in a big way. And I feel like this record in particular paved the way for my enjoyment of people like Jackson Browne and Lyle Lovett and like Graham Parsons, like Nick Drake and things like that. So Bob Dylan and opening up that world to me and making that something that became a big part of my life. And lastly, 1979 released the most recent one in terms of most influential or important in my life, and that would be Joy Division, Unknown Pleasures. This is such an iconic cover now. You know, you see people with t-shirts with this on. I wonder if many of them even know what the t-shirt comes from. But this record, in many ways, this along with the second record, Closer, are the two that, you know, paint the whole picture of Joy Division. This is if Berlin was my first Winter of Discontent album, this record, Unknown Pleasures, was my second Winter of Discontent. And I do remember going through a whole winter of listening to Joy Division excessively, including 12-inch singles like Atmosphere and Transmission. And sometimes the songs explode out and they're like a great cathartic release. And the way that Ian Curtis danced, and you'd see this on the early sort of videos that would come out of him dancing to Transmission, dance, dance, dance to the radio. But also some really, really dark kind of dark songs. It's not even just lyrically that they were dark, but the actual recordings, the sound, Martin Hannett's production, just created an incredible atmosphere that still holds up to this day, and it does not sound dated. It doesn't have kind of a dated sound to it. It's got a sound that's all its own, and definitely Joy Division. So this particular record, I would say, number 10 on my list of 10 most influentials. And for those of you that are sticking around, I'm going to do my plus one. So my plus one is sort of an outlier, and it's this. The Rolling Stones, Bed Spring Symphony. This is a bootleg, and I'm using this as an example, although this was my favorite bootleg of all. So a Mick Taylor Rolling Stones concert, 1973. And when I heard this, it really opened up a world where I recognized that there were live recordings that surpassed anything that was released officially. The performance on this record, even the sound, I mean, it's not beautifully mixed, but it's got to be a soundboard, but they seem to also have a good blend with the audience kind of going crazy in it, which is fantastic. But this record is fantastic. And it got me into collecting bootlegs for quite a while. In fact, so much so that I used to buy lots of bootlegs and sell them to my high school buddies, took them to university to help offset some of my university costs. And I used to order them from the back of Rolling Stone magazine. There was a company called Still Rare Records out of Chapel Hill, North Carolina, and I'd buy buckets of them and sell them and then keep some of the profits as well. But this record, oh my God, it's just so good. And the very smart, the way they put it together. The very beginning of side one is a sound of like an old 78 saying, in the old days, the recordings weren't such good quality and they sounded like this. And they played a little bit of like Brown Sugar with a really bad production. And again, a live recording, a bad bootleg. And then, but now with modern technology, we can get the best notes and clear as the eyes of the girl you're dancing with. And they go right into Gimme Shelter. And it is just exquisite. The sound, the performance, everything. Mick Taylor's guitar intro is fantastic. So this really got me into collecting bootlegs and recognizing that not everything that is fantastic by the bands is released officially. And interestingly, for those of you that don't know, that particular bootleg and that particular performance appeared later in this Goat's Head Soup box set. So actually, I don't think there's any markers on there, but this is a box set that came with Goat's Head Soup remastered and remixed or whatever. And this is the official release that came years later. It's called Brussels Affair, live 1973. And if you ever get a chance to get this, you can probably find it streaming. I'm not sure, but check it out. This is an exquisite live recording of the Rolling Stones. Not as exciting as the bootleg, but we're doing the right thing. The band's getting paid. God knows Mick and the boys need it. In fact, on the bootleg, one of the things it says at the very end is, let's all get together and buy Keith some teeth, okay? Famously, because his teeth were all rotted out from heroin use. There you have it. My top most influential records in my collection. Tomorrow it could be another 10, but you know, these are the biggies. Carpe diem.